Welcome back to another episode of Dance Med Spotlight, where we talk about all things dance medicine and dance science. You are here for part 2 of an amazing conversation with Dr. Robert Tsai, physical therapist and owner of Dance Prehab. Make sure that you checked out part 1 already. We had a lot of great conversation there, and then we change a little bit about what we're talking about and some of the focus of our conversations for part 2. So make sure that you check out both parts of this great conversation.
Yeah, and I think, this is probably once again a sort of like generalization, but I think about how, dance is ultimately a movement experience. And at some point I want them, or not I want them, but at some point it's having them understand that like not movement for movement's sake, but like, yeah, can you trust yourself in whatever position that you're going to put yourself in? So you're almost like teaching the body movement concepts that it can apply to different circumstances and different contexts versus like a singular exercise, right? Yeah. So, and that's going to ebb and flow between the person, but I try to get them moving like as soon as possible, right? Especially in like the rehab setting, because you're still trying to build that awareness to connection and movement quality, even though they might still have like limitations or restrictions on movement. And since we do have to respect the body as it's healing. Yeah.
One of the places where I've noticed some of this too, just from my own experience, is the difference of like the West Coast swing that I do versus the dances that I grew up doing, where it's, growing up, it was a lot of learning the choreography, not really having any improvised movements per se. And it's just like, this is how you get to this position and transition through to this other thing. And with West Coast swing, it's 100% improvised unless you're doing a routine division, which very few people do in the grand scheme of things. And so feeling confident to do all of the crazy things in a partnered situation within West Coast swing, where there's turns and dips and, who knows what all we do. That's a whole other level of confidence and security in your body movement versus when it was this very placed whatever. And so seeing the difference between the two now and appreciating that, and even trying to get some of those elements crossed over, whether it's borrowing concepts from some of the classical styles of dance that I grew up doing to my more improvised dancers, or vice versa, borrowing from them and giving it to the others. So that has been an interesting experience that I'm sure you can appreciate with your background of breakin too, since it is such an improvised thing. So yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny that you mentioned that, because I remember this is when I was living up in Hollywood and gigging and auditioning up there. There used to be a club that we'd go to, and the live band there, I don't know if anyone's listening to this right now would remember it, but the club was called King on Sunset. And the band would play like Latin music, and they'd go in and out of Latin music and breaks. And so you got two very specific and you got two very specific people that would show up, which were the salsa, bachata, like merengue dancers, and then you get like breakers, and you get like tap. But I remember like going there for the first couple times, and we love doing our thing, we'll do it. And then I just watched these people, with partnering and like how they like ebbed and flowed out of their energy and their shapes. And sometimes people be like partnering like two people at the same time. I'm like, man, I learned the wrong dance. I'm like, dancing by myself, like I guess that's fun, but holy crap, that's amazing. Yeah, it's yeah, with that memory just got back to me. So going back onto what we were talking about earlier too, about that idea of like choice and like improv, right? And I think that's a continual conversation, especially with the many of the younger dancers. A conversation where we're having is this idea of like, hey, you can make decisions. You have the ability to make decisions, and sometimes it's as simple as, it's as simple as, hey, how do you want to warm up today? You know, some dancers are like, yeah, let's do this. I'm like, great. But of course, on the other end of the spectrum, it's like, well, can you just tell me what to do? Let's just do that. And I'm like, no, we are here to, right? If we're talking advocacy and we're talking about, they have to choose to advocate for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that, to me, it doesn't necessarily, at least in our sort of experiences in this population, like that begins with what you were saying, like giving them a choice. And sometimes that starts with like the really small things. How are
Mm-hmm.
you going to warm up today? Right? Because
Yeah.
if they can't, and I don't want to give like ultimatums or anything like that, but in some ways in my head, I'm like, yeah, if they can't choose to give themselves a warm up because that is something that they need to do, that, I mean, that in itself is a form of advocacy, perhaps, right? For
Yep.
themselves. If they can't do that for themselves, how can we expect them to do it for themselves in relationship to somebody? And not only
Mm-hmm.
relationship to somebody, but relationship to somebody who is of perceived higher authority in their community. Like that's hard,
Yep.
right? And especially with all the power that many dance teachers hold, in terms of like industry connections, teacher connections, things like that. It's like, we don't want to step on toes.
Mm-hmm.
People, or I mean, in the sense of like people perceiving it that way. So,
Yeah.
yeah, permission. It feels like it keeps going back to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
Permission,
from a clinical
advocating for yourself.
standpoint too, I think, it's having those moments, like you said, of like, what would you like to do to warm up today? It gives us an opportunity to assess their level of understanding. Like, do they get the concepts that we've been talking about? Are they making good choices of, say you say, I want you to do whether it's 10 minutes of something or five different things or however whatever parameters you want to give them for what's our warm up look like. Um, are they following some of the concepts of like, okay, you want me to do some stuff where I have some level changes and where, maybe I work in some plyometric type stuff at some point, or, who knows what choices, or is it all one thing that they're wanting to do? And it's like, okay, clearly you're getting some of the concepts, but we can flesh some of this out as well. And so that's
Absolutely.
one of the things that I see too when we give them an opportunity to show us and demonstrate what they've been learning.
Yeah, it's that rinse, wash, repeat. I mean, and I firmly believe that. I would love to believe that what we do is impactful in like one moment, but having worked in the studio environment, but also having worked within college and also like pre-professional environments, like yeah, it is the ongoing battle, but I think that's where the challenge then becomes for us in our spaces about like what are the ways that we can help to promote and create spaces for consistency. And that
Mhm.
looks, depending on the program, that's just going to look so different.
Yeah.
Is it like at least on the studio end, I know a lot of the conversations are like, oh, we want these are things that every studio should have. These are things that every program should have. And sure, I hope so.
Mhm.
Um, but then there is the conversation of funding. That's always a thing, no matter where you are institutionally, because you're talking like well-known large institutions, but you're also talking like your local dance studio, right?
Mhm.
Um, Also time, right? What are the perceived benefits of training hours, and how much do we do that is going to be beneficial, and then how much is too much? Do we need to take 7 ballet classes a week?
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I don't know. I think those are the conversations that are starting to pop up, and I think many clinicians and many people in our space are beginning to understand, like, okay, in order to push things forward, the conversations are no longer about information. The conversations are about systems and structures, and um, you know, writing proposals and writing grants, and um, making sure funding is allocated, finding funding, finding donors. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. That's something I'm exploring for myself in a few different ways.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll have an answer in a couple of years. Maybe that'll be an IADMS presentation.
There you go. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke what was on my mind there, where I think, we've been doing a good job from the dance medicine world of giving out a lot of information. And I think people are starting to, there's more awareness that there are specialists, awareness that maybe we have some suggestions of doing things differently, or like how can we modify things? How do we keep our dancers safe and changing from some of the historical and cultural ways of approaching some of the things.
Mhm.
But now we need to start figuring out how to help with the application and integration of it all. One of the things that came up this last weekend too from that talk I was talking about, one of the dancers had said, okay, so I think all of this sounds great. I understand what you're saying. I understand how this could be helpful, but I also can't think of any specific examples of dancers who have made it professionally following these principles. And so it's like, ooh, that is a good point. Like I can think of some ways to demonstrate some of that, some, whether it's specific people or research studies that have been coming out of certain institutions and that kind of thing. But like, it's not publicly seen in the public eye to understand that this is what's happening. And it's like, ooh, maybe we could do a better job with giving specific examples or talking to those people who've actually been integrating these things, instead of just saying, this is what you should be doing.
Yeah,
How does it
that's
actually
going to
work?
be, yeah, no, I agree. But I mean, that's going to be the long game, right? Because I would
Exactly.
say that the dancers that we are all seeing now and supporting now will be those dancers.
Hmm.
Um, the dancers that are the professionals, I like to think of these like little shifts. So you have a school of thought where it's like, well, we were fine without it, but that community is also, the main focus right now is the community, I would say, the narrative is now becoming like, oh, these are things I wish I had as a kid, but I am now doing it as an adult and as a professional.
Yes.
Give it like a couple of years, the narrative is going to change. Like, this is something I've always known of since I was like 12, right?
Hmm.
um so yeah, so I think once again, just acknowledging the culture, and how that culture is like shifting. So there is hope. I think
Yes.
it brings me peace, should I say, because we can always like get up in arms about things sometimes, but it brings me peace that there is that shift that's happening. And I see it happening on many of the other practitioner ends, and I hope that's a conversation that we're continuing to facilitate for us as well.
Hmm.
um, and then being able to start having that conversation on the institutional level, or at least more robustly on the institutional level.
Yeah,
uh, make it like the new norm, right?
exactly.
um, yeah. So I think as far as, yeah, just as far as change goes, like it's slow going, but it's happening.
Hmm.
um, and I just, how do I say this? I think I just understand that like health and wellness is like a trend at the moment. Obviously, from the last 4 years with COVID and things like that, which is great. Social media is always going to be a thing.
Hmm.
So, and there are plenty of studies out there that talk about the types of information that's like out on social media, and how we would like to adhere to a higher standard, right?
Yep.
Um, I don't know. I don't have any answers for that other than for us on our end. We just try to do the best that we can to influence the people that are are coming through our spaces, both in person and virtually, and we continue to, yeah. Um, you can probably cut sections of this out. How, yeah, how do we help dancers navigate not just like good information, but like good information for them,
Yes.
you know
Yes.
and how do we help them discern? How do we help them understand? I don't want to just default to say like what's good for them, but I think there is something about acknowledging where your body is at and where you are physically and mentally, so you can make those types of decisions. And that begins with
Mhm.
that type of awareness and acknowledgement, to be like, okay, I am I perhaps feel frustrated about this, or I have the space to express that I'm frustrated about it, or these are the buckets that I want to fill.
Mhm.
This is a goal I would like to achieve because I see somebody achieving that goal, but I also acknowledge that what does this goal mean for me, and how do all of those energies and conversations ultimately allow them to look at information and navigate the world around them.
Mhm.
I
Exactly.
think that, I think that's how I want to say it.
Mhm. No, I
Yeah.
love that, and it's funny because as you're talking about that and, like, making choices for yourself and being able to make sense of all of that and being aware of your body and that kind of stuff, this example popped, like, right up in my head as you were talking about that. So, my coffee. I'm a human who is caffeine sensitive and also has anxiety. Sometimes when my body's feeling a certain way, when my brain is feeling a certain way, it's like caffeine is not going to be my friend today. And so I've kind of learned where it's like, okay, if I'm feeling like this today, if I want to have coffee, I'm going decaf and I'm having a little bit. And then I have other days where I'm like, I'm feeling good. I'm going to have all the caffeine and it's going to be fine. But like, that's a really simple, really silly example. But like, and it took me 30 some years to figure that out. But I
Mhm.
found it out eventually. And so, being able to have those kinds of things, whether it's what we're consuming, how we're moving, what we're doing for our bodies that day, I think the same concept can apply.
Yeah. And once again, all across the whole lifespan, right? It's like one of those things where working with kids and then working with adults, and you're like, some things are the same, you know,
Mhm,
and understanding where like things came from, like origin stories, not in terms of culture, but also in terms of like habits and perceptions of perhaps like self worth and things like that.
mhm.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on like how much do you? I'm just kind of curious. Like, how much do you talk with your dancers about like your own perhaps challenges? And I go from the standpoint of in terms of being an example, right? Two
Mhm,
examples I always give is one, I mean, they recognize, dance prehab is a thing, that I'm sort of this face of this organization, et cetera. And I tell them too that like, look, you need to learn how to slow down sometimes. And I
mhm,
let them know that like, I love what I do here, but I also need to slow down sometimes because I have a small human now. So I need to make sure that I am not just going, 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 going. And I tell them that like dance taught me, well, maybe not dance, my experience with dance and the way I wanted to approach dance was go, 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 go.
mhm.
So I think it's nice to have that conversation of like, how I am as a person now. I am older than you, but I want you to understand that these lessons that I'm telling you that you can apply now are still lessons that I'm continuing to apply for myself, right?
Yep.
One, and then two, the other part of like talk about the injury prevention conversation, and that's another conversation about about the use of the phrase injury prevention. But
Yes.
um, and I tell them that like taking care of myself before as a dancer in high school was like so I could do my shows.
Mhm,
Taking care of myself in college was well also so I could do my shows and also so I could wake up for class. Um, taking care of myself as a professional meant earning a paycheck and supporting myself. And now taking care of myself means so I can play with my kid and
mhm,
that I can still get down on the ground. I can being a older quote unquote older parent, I can still run and jump and chase with confidence.
mhm.
Um, Different contexts, similar ideas, and so I often share those types of things with them.
Yeah.
Just kind of curious too on your end, is that something you feel like like how much is too not like how much is too much, but is that something you do as well?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's, the dancers that I work with or in my role as a professor now, there's a lot of
Mhm.
like, demonstrating how I am a human just like they are and some of the things that come up. And, sometimes it's um encouraging them with downtime and being like, I know we've all been working really hard lately with stuff in class and it's been a lot. And so I'm encouraging you to try taking at least a day this weekend where you aren't doing anything school related so that you can have some time away and have a chance to recover. And I'm going to try doing the same, because I know I need it as well. Or, with my dancers, I've had plenty of injuries that I've recovered from and have, certain experiences around. I'm still a dancer and competitor. Like I have a competition coming up in 2 weeks. And so there's conversations of like, oh, here's how it went and things that I learned from it or ways that I'm preparing myself for it and things that I'm thinking about. Or, yeah, I mean, I have a lot of those conversations with them. And even things of, say I'm working like yesterday, I worked with a dancer who is primarily ballet. And we were working on some things where it was requiring some pretty extreme ranges of motion on her part. I have never been a flexible human. And especially since I haven't been training in ballet in particular, I still take ballet classes here and there, but it's not like a normal thing. When I'm showing her things, I'm like, I can't do this exercise very well, and I can't do it in the ranges I'm going to ask you to do it. Part of that is because for my styles of dance that I focus on, I don't need to work on flexibility. And so that's not where I focus my time. But here's what we're going to do. Here's how it applies, and then I go into whatever exercise it is that we're going to do. And so, yeah, I have all of those conversations and like explanations and lessons and whatever as we go.
Yeah. No, I love that, and I think it's such a shift for them to because once again, they're often in these spaces where they're and I'm not saying that the teachers don't do this in our community or anything like that, but I think more often than not, there's once again there's that perceived that perception of like authority and like, oh my God, that person has it all together. That person is
Hmm.
like making it because they've got everything.
Yeah.
And um I don't know. I hope that in speaking in those ways or at least expressing those things, it's like, hey, just understand I'm continuing to experience the world. I have a couple of years on you guys, but I'm still human. I'm still learning. I'm still applying, and there are lessons that I haven't learned yet. You know,
Yeah.
uh,
And I think also, from our position of authority that, working in this health and wellness space and having the knowledge that we do, that there are even things that we're still learning or, things where it's like,
oh my gosh,
yes, I should quote unquote know better than what I did, but hey, I did what I did and now here's what I'm doing about it. Um, and so some of that too, where it's like, even though I quote unquote have all this knowledge and experience that you don't have as a 12-year-old dancer, I'm still learning how to apply this and have consistency and also give myself grace in moments, and
yes,
giving myself
yeah,
permission to make mistakes and to learn from them, or have permission to give myself downtime and recovery time and taking care of myself and not feeling like I'm being selfish or letting people down or any of that kind of stuff. And so I think all of that is really important to talk about.
yeah. It's always like we talk about on the positive end, we always talk about like, yeah, dance taught me like how to work hard. Dance taught me like about integrity. Dance taught me how
Yep.
to like work with the community. Dance taught me how to like do X, Y, and Z. But then on the other hand, it's also like, well, dance also taught me that like my creative brain also works at 3 a.m. And so maybe in some ways I'm still like, great, I'm gonna just like stay up late tonight because I feel like I need some inspiration. And then I'm like, didn't happen. So
Mhm.
I don't know. It's yeah, I think it's just acknowledging that one thing we always like to say too is like movement is an experience, as in this case dance, and then experiences inform the mover. So what are these lessons that we're kind of like taking, not just in terms of healthcare, but just how we think about things, how we move through the world, and how we
Mhm.
perceive relationships, how we approach relationships. Um,
Yeah.
and I think all of this, kind of tying it back to dance prehab, I think it's that, right? Ultimately, it's I think our approach is like physical therapy, but all and training, but at the same time, the bigger picture is that this is a space. um,
Mhm.
and what are the conversations we can have in this space? What are the things you can allow yourself to do in this space? The permissions you give yourself, the words that you use with yourself. This is a place where you can really sort of like explore and learn,
Mhm.
without judgment, um, or we try to facilitate that as best as we can, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think it's been an interesting journey because I don't think, most people think like, oh, did you ever want to own a business, or did you ever know that you wanted to work specifically with dancers? And the truth is that I wanted to work with, well, one, I never wanted to own a business, and two, I never thought that I never really thought that I would be in this place where like I only would treat dancers. Um,
Mhm.
so it's been interesting to just kind of, once again, kind of ebbing and flowing and listening to the community, and filling in the spaces that we feel like people are expressing that they would like filled. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a response. It's never really like a, like, we're gonna like do this, like
Yeah.
this is what we've always wanted to do. This is like interesting you say that. How can we help you there, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so it continues to be an exploration, and I hope it, at least if it's my brain, it's always gonna it's hopefully it's always gonna stay that way, right?
Mhm.
Just not trying to give into the pressures of what we live in, which is a capitalistic society, and so
Mhm.
whole nother
Mhm.
conversation. But yeah,
Yeah, and I find the same, like I never had plans to work in the dance arena. Um, Grew up as a dancer, got through high school, graduated from my studio, and then it was like, okay, that was my phase growing up. Cool, we're moving on to other things. Turned out that was not the case. I kept dancing, kept going back for classes, like it had to be a part of what I was doing. Um,
yeah,
but then on one of my clinical rotations, I was working with a PT who was phenomenal. And, she was seen as the expert in the area that people would drive an hour to go see and say only on her schedule and all of that kind of stuff. She had a 15-year-old dancer who had injured her hip, ballet specific, and she had gotten her back to normal person everything, but not ballet dancer everything. Had even made custom inserts for her shoes, her point shoes, and that kind of stuff. And I was intimidated by this PT because she was brilliant. But one day I just kind of go, so I have a background in dance and, can I try some stuff? And she confided in me, when it was just the two of us. Yes, because I'm honestly running out of ideas for this dancer. I know that she's not where she wants to be, but I don't really know how to get her there either. And so I kind of went back and looked at things that I learned when I was in the studio, what warm ups we did, what movements we did, how we sequence things, whatever, and started layering it with what I was learning in PT school. And I was able to get that dancer back where she needed to be in 2 weeks. And the PT had said, I never would have come up with the things that you did. I can see where this dance experience really informed what you were able to do with her. And then there were other times on other clinical rotations and early jobs where that same sort of thing would come up, whether it was dancers, figure skaters, gymnasts, anybody who's kind of in that aesthetic artist category.
yes,
Um, but we I just kept seeing some of those different things come up. And then eventually it got to a point where it was like, maybe I can turn this into a thing. And I did. So here we are. But
yes,
yeah, it was never this intentional goal. It was never like the dream as I was going through PT school or anything like that. But just getting these experiences saying, this is where you can provide some value and use your expertise and experience. To maybe help a few other people. And like you said, it's seeing what people are wanting or needing and figuring out ways to kind of lean into that a little bit.
yeah, and it's, man, I would say, and one thing I'm very grateful to, well, I'm grateful for many things. I was gonna, one thing I'm grateful for to my wife, but what I think, approaching everything from like an educator standpoint, I think she really helped me like get out of my PT brain and
Mhm.
really sort of think about like this idea of just listening is probably something I need to continue working on. The forever struggle. Um, but yeah, it's I think, I never, like you said, never like grand plans. You just kind of sit back and, sometimes we're like, you need to know this. And like dancers need to know this. And like teachers need to know this. Studio owners should do this. And sometimes it's like, okay, what, well, like, how can I help you?
Mhm.
What are the things you're seeing and how can I help you like navigate X, Y, and Z? And that can be like injury specific to where it's like, we're seeing a lot of knees, And it's like, okay,
Mhm.
so we're gonna just like focus on that. Or maybe it's conversations, right? Where people don't know where to go. And so that might just be saying like, hey, we exist, or if they're in like a different community, like these people exist. Um, or sometimes once again, going back to that funding issue, right? It's like, well, this
Mhm.
organization has a lot of funding, but none of it is allocated to specifically health and wellness. How do we, with our experience and our knowledge, influence that possibility as well, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, I think like you said, it's just looking at what people are saying because that's they will tell you, right?
Yep.
If we can just sit and listen. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, it's been fascinating. I feel like I don't know how you feel, but like everything has just like progressed so quickly.
Mhm.
Um, I I think about how I think about how when I first got out of school, I was like, oh yeah, this is my 5-year plan. I'm probably gonna work as a, just in a regular outpatient space for like 5 years, and then maybe I'll think about doing my own thing.
Mhm.
And here we are, pretty much like 5, almost 6 years later, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like had I waited 5 years, it would have just completely, completely and wildly different, So, and that's
Mhm.
where I feel like that's where that listening and watching and acknowledging component has like really come in because it's once again it's never been a plan. It's kind of always been a little reactive, perhaps, like, oh, this conversation is really robust, or like, oh, a lot of people are talking about these things, and then being proactive and like, how do we move the conversation forward in those areas?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. And I found that even just from the professional perspective too, where it's like, kind of keeping myself open for the opportunities and things that come up where it's like, and it's not a matter of saying yes to everything. It's not, it's important to still have boundaries and still have, what are
yes.
your goals from this, whether it's like achieving a certain thing or lessons that you want to learn along the way or, whatever. But so much of where I've gotten professionally has come from that. Like I remember, I think this is probably one of the most like clear examples from my life, but like years ago, I was president of the Alumni Association for our physical therapy program from where I graduated.
But of
And
course you were.
that's another story for another day.
Yeah.
But as part of that, I also sat on our scholarship and endowment board. One of the members on that was Dean Hassey, who owns or owned multiple practices here in the Denver area and had a really good reputation. And, he was really passionate about getting involved and got to know him over some time. And at some point, when I was looking to start my own thing, I reached out to him and I said, hey, I would love if, whether it's a single meeting or trying to establish some sort of like mentorship relationship, I would love a chance to talk with you. Can I take you out to lunch or dinner and, and have a chat? And so we did. And we ended up having just that one conversation about any of it, but got a lot of really great information from him. Still saw him in other respects when I was on these different boards. And then at one point after I had started my practice, I get a call from him and he says, "Hey, I know that you're starting your practice and I know it takes a while to build up and actually start making money and that sort of thing.
Yes.
I can use help in my clinics with some per diem coverage and maternity leave, holidays, that kind of stuff. Do you want to come and cover some shifts for us sometimes?" Like, I don't mind that you're opening your own practice. I don't, I don't see it as like a threatening thing. I don't see a competition. Like, I want to help you out because I know the situation and I can use some help also. And so, I ended up doing that for a while as I was building my practice. And it was just through building those relationships and having some of those opportunities and other things that I was doing that opportunity presented itself to me to help me and help him. But, just keeping an eye out and fostering those relationships, building your network, all of those kinds of things, because you never know where it can get you and where, what you're going to learn and where it can influence your journey along the way.
Yeah. Um, Luck is when preparation meets opportunity,
Yeah.
right? So if you've, and we all know that like building relationships, networking, like that's definitely something.
Hmm.
I think, and and I think that's also been like actually now that you bring that up, it's also been interesting because we have a presence. I just acknowledge that we have a presence in like the online space, the virtual
Hmm.
space. But I think it's been hard to, for me personally, it's been hard to understand that we have that hold. And sometimes I guess you could call it perhaps like a perceived sense of responsibility where I feel like, okay, we have this space virtually, but we also like, so we need to do something, And then
Hmm.
there's the other part of me that's like, well, I'm in the virtual space, but what am I doing here in our geographical space and in Orange County, um, with the studios that are in our vicinity and with the community that we exist in? And it's kind of, I don't know. I guess this is maybe more of like it's probably more of like a business conversation of operating within the worlds that we do, but it's kind of an active choice for me to invest more time into like on the ground
Hmm.
versus virtual. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't really have any good explanations for that for me right now.
Hmm.
So I apologize if anyone's like ever reaching out to like collaborate on virtual things, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't. but but I think that's it would, like you were saying, like drawing boundaries, right, and understanding that as a dancer, it was always yes, 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 yes. You have to, you gotta keep working. So you're just like, I got to say yes to this. Um,
Hmm.
done some of the most ridiculous jobs ever, and you just had to do it anyway. So but I think it's that, right? And it's not to say that I don't want to be in the virtual space, or I don't think that that's something I want to do, or it's that I don't want to collaborate in the virtual space. It's just that my heart right now is just on the ground with where we're at. And and how do I, yeah, how do we, maybe one day we can like really really venture and have like a whole like online whatever situation that's way more expansive than like our Sunday sessions, which is of course very small and sort of just more conversational based.
Hmm.
But um yeah, it's uh, i I think about how are we, for us as an organization, and for myself as a person, like, okay, I need to take care of like our community here before you know going out. So thinking, I suppose, like depth out of instead of breadth, right?
Hmm. Yep.
um and which is honestly like it's a privilege to be able to be in both of these spaces. But I also, once again, where is our energy, where is our energy going? And then, at what point am I like spreading myself too thin?
Hmm.
if, if
Definitely.
anything, yeah.
And I know for
um
me, it's also, kind of what is the intention with the different things that I do? So, to your point, with some of the virtual stuff, whether it's things like this with the podcast or what I'm posting on Instagram and YouTube and all of that kind of stuff, versus what I'm doing in the clinic and what I'm doing locally. a lot of what I do online, that's that like very public side of stuff, it's coming more from the space for me of like, I just want people to know that, you know, there are specialists who understand and there are people who are here to help you. And, you know, there are things that you can learn and just kind of this like help with acknowledging some of those things and exposure to stuff. But then on the in the clinic, in the community and all of that, it's whether it's the one-on-one touch points and helping facilitate some of the things that we've been talking about throughout this episode, or helping studios figure out how to integrate some of this stuff to make changes for their community as a whole, and having that different kind of relationship with them. You know, I have very different things that I do in the two places. And so if you look at one spot, you think that like this is my intention and this is what I do. If you look in a different place, it's going to look very different,
Yeah.
because I have very different goals for each of them.
Yeah. And I think that's, it's sort of like what is accessible in each space is going to be different, and how you can. I'm not saying, it's not that one we feel like one impact is like better than the other. I just think that with our
Hmm.
energies right now, that's kind of where we are. Yeah. So, but it's nice. I think, at least like in the virtual space, there's a lot of great people out there doing
Hmm.
things, and so, you know, it's not like we feel like we have to like try to get our piece of the pie,
Yeah,
or anything like that. Um,
exactly.
yeah.
And it gives opportunities like this where, you know, you and I got to interact online for a while, and then we actually met at IADMS and, you know, had some really great conversations and a dinner conversation and all kinds of things, and still staying connected now virtually. Like all of
Yeah.
that is fantastic, to help foster
Yeah.
some of those relationships too.
Yeah. That's, I think, and it's nice to know too that we're just humans. We're just
Yeah.
humans that have had experiences that have led to certain decisions being made, that have led to, you know, our impact in the, or our choices to choose to do things to make certain, hopefully make certain impacts, right? Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, no, I going back to your comment about, staying connected and meeting at iAtoms. I think, you know if there was one thing, I think, if there was something to take away from this podcast, perhaps, this episode, I
Yeah.
think it's just, I also have to remember that I'm human, and I, what I what I think I try to pay attention to as far as like, you know, dance prehab goes is, I mean, those are all things I think I try to pay attention to in my own life as well.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I think we had this conversation over dinner at iAdams too. Was this idea of like, yeah, we have this physical therapy organization that treats dancers, and it's very nice to be able to say that, we're making some kind of impact and that there's acknowledgement of that impact. But I honestly, and I had this conversation with my wife too. I was like, I realized that I treat this, when I think about dance prehab, I almost think about it more as like a, perhaps kind of like a dance company versus like a
Mm.
straight business,
Yeah.
because I don't know. And I think about, well, one, I've never owned a dance company. I've been part of dance companies, but what is the root of it is that like we all have a common idea that we foster, that everybody kind of like filters into. I
Mhm.
learn from our clinicians, and hopefully our clinicians also learn from me. And what is that main thing that moves us forward? Um,
Mhm.
it just so happens that our thing is like physical therapy, but and training, but it could also happen in other contexts, right? Not just in like a physical therapy clinic. And I don't want to call it an issue, but anything that I have done has always been, I have found, and in reflection, has always been deeply personal. And
Mhm.
so it's hard to find harmony between work and life, because historically, especially with dance, the two have always been the same.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of conversations of like, oh, you have to be able to separate yourself from the business. You have to be able to, set up your systems and things like that so you can take yourself out of the picture, which ultimately is still important. But,
Mhm.
it's, I think I just acknowledge that it's so much more than that. It's, everything that is going into it is what we wish we had. It is what we we hope people want to some extent,
Mhm.
but we hope that it sets an example for, um, in the way that we set examples as individuals for our dancers. We hope that the organization itself also sets an example for what the future possibilities can be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think I just wanted to mention that because I don't have like an answer for anything. A lot of people are like, oh, like you said, like, is this something you always wanted to do? And truth is, like, no, it's just kind of this is how I want to move through the world currently. So
Mhm.
that's what this is.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think I know we could talk for like a day,
We could.
and still not cover all of the
Absolutely.
things.
Yeah.
But I think this is a good opportunity because I think that's a bit of like a full circle of where we started with some of this. This is a good opportunity for this special segment on the show. On every episode, we have this special segment, the final bow. Basically, it is the take home message. And I know you already kind of gave a little something that you're taking away from our conversation, also. What is something that you hope the listeners take away, whether it is other dance medicine professionals who are listening to this, or aspiring dance medicine professionals, or members of the dance community, whether it's teachers, studio owners, dancers themselves? What's something that you hope they walk away with?
Oh my gosh, this is always the hardest. I was actually thinking about this because I knew you were gonna ask this.
You did your
Um,
homework.
yes, I did. Um, I'm still gonna go with, movement is an experience, and experiences inform the mover, because I think, and once again, an extension of like how dance prehab has been as far as like our lives with our clinicians as like, dancers and performers.
Mhm,
I think there are a lot of conversations. It doesn't matter if we are, uh, teachers or parents or, um, educators, directors, clinicians. Um, Movement is an experience. So it's physical, it's social, it's emotional, it's
mhm,
cultural, and all of these things will influence the people in our spaces. And how are the movement experiences that we are creating influencing the the movers that are, um, in our spaces? How does it influence them in the future, right? When I see younger dancers, it's less about, and this is something I like repeat to myself too, it's, are they a dancer, right?
mhm.
Or are they a human who has chosen dance as a method of expression, and
Mm,
their method of learning to move through life?
yeah,
And I think that separation is nice because it helps us acknowledge their identity as a human, their identity, their current identity as a dancer, and the possibilities for the future identities that they can have through movement as well. So, movement is an experience, and experiences inform the mover. Um, Once again, regardless of context, I think that's very applicable in just acknowledging the people that we have, in our spaces, that have, chosen to be in our spaces, and, hopefully actively chosen to be in our spaces, and that we
mhm.
also choose to meet them where they're at as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Lastly, the shameless plug, your opportunity to plug anything that you have going on, any organization that you work with. This is your chance.
Great. So most of you may already know, Dance Prehab Physical Therapy and Performance is our organization. You can find us at www.danceprehab.com. On Instagram, we are at DancePrehab. And then on TikTok, which I am continuing to forever be figuring out, it's also DancePrehab. We do have educational opportunities as well, which you can find at danceprehab.education. It is a new venture. And by new venture, I mean, I'm interested in looking at how our approaches in the rehab space can extend into the dance learning environment to set our dancers up for things in the future, especially in terms of health and wellness. We are not the answer to everything, but we hope to be part of the answer. And it's a continual exploration for us. Yeah. And for me personally, I am at Rob Tsai DPT. That's ROBTSAI DPT on Instagram. And I'm happy to chat all things dance, all things life, this journey that is currently dance prehab. Yeah, just, always open to opportunities for dialogue and how we can push the boundaries, right? Have our boundaries, but also push the boundaries that need to be pushed. Yes.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, Rob, thank you so much for your time today. It was fantastic getting to chat with you. And I look forward to the next time that we get to see each other.
Yes. If not in Italy, then Vegas. 2025.
Dance Med Spotlight is hosted and produced by Alyssa Arms. We discuss all things dance medicine. This has been another episode from Dance Med Spotlight. The Dance Med Spotlight is intended for educational purposes only. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present.